Welcome to the fifth Lunch and Learn session in the series on operational excellence. This session's topic is building accountability into the process, establishing the mechanism to improve accountability and modify employee behavior. This session is sponsored by Jamestown Community College Workforce Readiness. The session is facilitated by Max Krug from Future State Engineering. We hope that you enjoy the session.
Okay, good day everyone. Today's session is on Operational Excellence, Session 5 on building accountability into the process. And really what we want to do is establish a mechanism to improve accountability and modify employee behavior. As we go through the Operational Excellence transition, one thing we realize we got to do something different, right? We can't continue to do the same things over and over and expect different results. That's our definition of insanity. So we got to do something different. But people are creatures of habit, so to get them to change to do something different isn't easy. So part of this building accountability in the process is to modify that employee behavior to the new paradigm. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we can do that. Again, back to our necessary conditions for operational excellence. This session is going to focus on two of the necessary conditions. One, establishing the mindset to achieve sustainable improvement. Again, with any change, we want to make that improvement sustainable. We don't want to make a change and then 3 months later slip back to old practices. Okay, so if we implement an improvement, we got to be able to sustain it. If it's not sustainable, then that doesn't meet the criteria for operational excellence. Next is establish that positive change in organizational culture, right? So culture is how things get done, how people interact with each other, how decisions are made. We want to make a positive change in that culture. So again, back to our Dilbert cartoon. So what is not accountability? So the boss says, I'm moving to a shared leadership model. The boss says, for each of you will take on a piece of the leadership role. And Dilbert says, what's my piece? He says, let's see, I have you down for something called blame. And so the purpose of accountability isn't to blame people when things don't go right. It's to correct things and get the right behavior for things that don't happen as planned. So let's start by talking about a process. So the generic format for a process is described by what we call the IPO model, which stands for input, process, output. So process is basically a set of series or actions or steps taken to convert inputs into some desired output. So pretty much everything we can do, we can define as a process. We can define what the inputs are. We can define what the activities are within the process. And of course, we can define what the outputs are. So a lot of people talk about responsibility. I'm talking about accountability. So what's the difference between responsibility and accountability? So let's define that before we move into building accountability into the process. So responsibility is being answerable for something within one's power, control, or management. Okay, so I define accountability as being responsible for something, but ultimately being answerable for your actions. Accountability is something you hold a person to only after a task is done or not done. Okay, so people can have the responsibility but not be accountable. So typically what I see in companies is like the common areas, like the break area. Oh, it's everyone's responsibility to make sure the break area is clean. And when you go to the break area, it's a mess, right? Oh, it's everybody's responsibility. When it's everybody's responsibility, nobody's accountable. Okay, so we need to break that paradigm. Okay, yes, everyone's responsible, but someone needs to be accountable. Okay, so how do we create that accountability? So a note here, responsibility can be shared while accountability cannot. So if we have multiple people that are responsible for something and nothing's getting done, we need to get accountability in place, right? So we can hold one person responsible or accountable for that activity or action. So what we want to do is we want to build accountability into the process. So how is that done? So I want to talk about a concept called the management window. So when I was trained in value stream mapping, they talked a lot about the management window, but I don't see any information out there about what the management window is. So I define the management window is the time between when an action is taken until the time that management understands the effect, either positive or negative, of that action taken, right? So the sooner that we get feedback on the process, the better. The longer it takes to get that feedback on the process, you have a longer management window. So the goal is to reduce the management window, which is reducing the time between when the action is taken until we understand the effects of that action. So if I go back to the process model, and if I look at a system, so a system is multiple processes in combination, in sequence. We have inputs, the output of each process is the input for the next process, and we have some desired output that the customer is demanding. And of course, we have time moving along this as processes are being conducted. So in this case, if we wait till the final output is determined and we say, oh, something went wrong on the first process step, right? Our management window is this long period of time. So now we got to go back and figure out, oh, what happened 2 weeks ago that caused this issue? And it's hard to determine actually what went wrong and who was involved in that decision making. So our goal is to shorten that feedback process. So as soon as a process is done, the sooner we can identify when the outcomes of that decision, positive or negative, the better. So we want to take and shorten that management window. So the feedback from the process is immediate, and we can decide whether that action taken was correct or not. And if it isn't correct, right, we don't want to discipline people. We want to coach them and understand what went wrong and correct it on the spot. So part of that is understanding what normal and what abnormal means. So I want to define these so we have an understanding. So a normal condition is the condition that occurs in a process when it's operating inside of its normal limits. Okay. I also define it as being able to describe what good looks like. So if we have a process, what does good look like? So abnormal, of course, is a condition that occurs in a process when it's operating outside of its normal limits. So a note here, in order to understand when an abnormal condition exists, we must understand what normal condition is, what good looks like. Okay, so how do we incorporate that into the process? We do it through visual management. So I'm a huge proponent of visual management. So visual management is being able to look at a process and understand what normal looks like. And if we understand what normal looks like, we can understand what abnormal looks like. If we can spot abnormality, then we can correct it, okay? So visual management is a very powerful tool to start building accountability into the process. There's all types of techniques. I'm not going to get into all the techniques. There's multiple techniques to use visual management to incorporate into any process. So a good visual management system will allow anybody, whether inside the process or outside the process, to look at the situation and understand if everything's operating as normal, right? We use visual aids to display the status of the process. If good visual management's in place, any person should be able to understand the current situation without asking questions, right? So it's nonverbal communication. In addition, if good visual management is in place, any person should be able to identify what abnormal looks like, okay? So I'll give a little story here. So I worked with a company, and they would get shipments from overseas. They would come in huge quantities of shipments. So they'd probably get 15 to 20 pallets at a time. So the general manager's like, the place where I go down for the unpacking is always disorganized. It's never organized. I've been on them for 3 years to organize the process, right? So I come in and I look at it and say, okay, the behavior that they were doing is they were opening up. So salespeople were coming down and telling them what product they needed. And so they're opening up 15 crates, digging through all the products, understanding, pulling out the ones that they needed to ship. And it was chaos all the time. So we redesigned the process and we said, okay, the goal is to work on one pallet at a time. Okay, so if you open a pallet, you're going to unbox everything from that pallet. You're not going to touch the product 3 or 4 times. You're going to take it. If you have it in your hand, you're going to complete it and move it to the next process step. Okay, so now we said, okay, the normal condition should be one open pallet. All other pallets should be in a rack and not being worked on. So now when we walk down there, what does normal look like? Normal looks like everything in the rack and one pallet being worked on. So now I have a standard developed. If I go down there and there's 2 pallets, what's going on? Why is there 2 pallets all right, being worked on? Why not 1, right? We need to understand the reason why there was 2 pallets and correct it immediately, right? So that's that feedback loop that we need to correct the process and use those as coaching moments. So if you can spot abnormality, then use that as a coaching moment to describe to the person why normal condition is important and also correct it immediately, right? We're not using it to blame or discipline, right? We're using it to improve the process, improve the communication, improve the work getting done, improve the accountability. So here's another example. So this is a company I work with that we have a visual scheduling board. Okay, so on the left-hand side are all the process steps, sort of in sequence of how the product flows. Across the top is time. Okay, so you can see the status, each of these jobs, each of these cards is a job. So you can see the status of each job, what department it is in, and whether things are normal or not. So you see these 2 black lines here. And so we use a color priority system. So the priority for the orders are, if you have a black order, it means it's late, that's first priority. Red means it's in its last third of its lead time, reliable lead time. That's second priority over black. Then yellow, then green. So the colors are a priority system. So these lines here tell us what normal looks like. So if the job cards are between these 2 lines, everything's normal. So in the production meeting, we look at the board and say, there's these jobs up here outside the lines. That's not normal. So we talk about those jobs. We don't talk about all the jobs. We only talk about abnormal conditions, and we can see it. Okay. So this is designed to give the current status of all jobs, where they are relative to what is being processed, where they are in the process, and where they are relative to its due date. And we can easily spot abnormality. So the management window was daily. So the supervisors are responsible for updating the cards in their department, the jobs in their department, on a daily basis for the 2:45 meeting. And of course, things weren't getting updated. So when we come to the meeting, cards aren't positioned where they actually are in the shop. So, okay, how do we solve that? So let's build accountability into the process. So instead of doing a 1-day management window, we said, okay, let's break it into 4 management windows. Before first break, before lunch, before afternoon break, end of the day. Okay, so now the new process is we want the supervisors to update it 4 times a day. Of course, not everybody updates it. Some people were, some people weren't. So the plant manager decided, okay, how can I get accountability? So he created a simple log, a sign-in sheet. When you come and update your cards at the end of before first break, initial the log. So now I got accountability into the process. So of course, we're trying to get behavior modification, right? people don't like to change the way they do things, right? So to get that behavior modification, we got to build that accountability. So now, before each interval, the management window, it's basically 2.5 hours. People have to come and sign the log that they updated the cards. Now, if someone doesn't update it, I can look at the sheet and see who I can hold accountable for not updating their department information. Okay, so this is an example of simple visual management that gives a ton of information and holds people accountable to their activities that they're supposed to do. And again, to do good visual management, it takes a lot of effort to design the right visual tools to display the information that we want to understand. Okay, so just don't think you're going to, oh, let's just put up a chart, right? That's not it. We need to understand, going back to our visual management thing, what information are we trying to communicate? How do we understand what normal looks like? How do we understand, if we can understand normal, we can understand what abnormal looks like. So another quick story, I had a company that had an assembly process, and they would give the guy all the orders for the week on Monday and say, okay, you need to complete these orders, by the end of the week. Come Friday, hey, how'd you do on those orders? Oh, I got half of them done. Oh, looks like you're working overtime for the weekend. So reduce the management window. So I said to the shop manager, what I want you to do is give him one order, and then when he finishes that order, tell him to bring it back, and I'll give you the next order. Okay, so now when I give him the first order, I can say, hey, Joe, how long to do this order? About 3 hours. So now I got accountability. So after 3 hours, I can go back and say, hey, Joe, how you doing on that order? Oh, I'm having a problem, right? So, okay, let me get you help. So now I've reduced the management window from 5 days to 2 to 3 hours, right? Huge improvement in performance, because we're correcting issues as soon as they arise. We're not waiting for some period of time and then figuring out, oh, we're behind schedule. Now what we got to do, now we got to run overtime to catch up. Okay, so there's a couple examples of where we incorporated visual management and accountability into the process to improve the behavior of the people. So just a quick review of accountability. So accountability is being responsible for something, also ultimately being answerable for your action. Accountability is something you hold a person to only after a task is done or not done. So the sooner we can get feedback on that task after it's completed, back to the process, the better. Next, incorporating accountability into the process. So the multi-step process. First we need to define what good looks like. Okay, so what is normal condition for the process? 2, how do we incorporate visual management into the process, answering those questions we said earlier. 3, how do we reduce the management window to short intervals? So this is extremely important during the transition period, that those intervals of the management window are extremely short, right? We need to get the behavior modification. So we adjust the management window according to that behavior modification. Once people start to become the new normal, then we can back off on the management window, right? We can make the management window bigger. Use abnormal conditions as a coaching moment. So not as a disciplinary action, as a coaching moment. So ensure the employee understands the importance of normal. And 2, correct the abnormality immediately, right? And we can do some quick root cause analysis of why the abnormal condition was created and stop it, okay? So, and then more importantly, give positive feedback on maintaining normal, right? So too many people get accustomed to negative feedback. We want to make the culture change, so to get that positive culture change, we want to give feedback on normal conditions. So people maintain normal conditions, give them positive feedback. Okay, so that's today's session on building accountability into the process. we can open it up for questions. And if Delaney, you want to talk about the next sessions coming up?
Sure. On behalf of JCC's Workforce Readiness and Future State Engineering, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today's sessions. We truly hope you're enjoying them and hope you're getting some valuable information from them. To that, we have the next 3 series. May 27th is Achieving Buy-in Through the Socratic Approach. June 3rd is Improving Flow, and June 10th is Being Productive versus Busy Work and Understanding the Differences between the two. Thank you. Max, I don't know if you want to add anything about what some of those sessions might entail?
Yeah, so the session next week is a addition to this session. So how do we use the Socratic approach to get people to change behavior or to get buy-in to a concept? So we do it through questioning. So part of that coaching moment where I was talking about in the accountability, coaching is about asking the right questions, right? So I have a rule about when we're doing a walk through the process, we're not allowed to tell people what to do or discipline. You're only allowed to ask questions. So the Socratic approach is how do we ask questions to get people to understand what we're trying to communicate to them. Improving flow is basically looking at the process and what's the benefits of improving flow. So there's a lot of benefits from improving flow, but a lot of companies struggle with improving flow. And then what builds on that is what is productive and what is busy work. So how do we define the difference between being productive and being busy? So we want to break those paradigms.
Okay, and Max, you do have a question that came into the chat. It says, Max, great info. Could you give us a few more examples of visual management and how this method helped the manager better and quicker understand and fix an issue and the savings seen from this act?
Yep. So again, another company that did, they're more of a distribution company, so they would get orders hourly. And so what would happen is they take the orders out to the shop beginning of the shift and say, hey, here's what's got to go today. And then they would go at the end of the day and say, hey, how'd you guys do? We need help. Send people from other departments, right? We need to get these orders up before UPS shows up. And right, everyone's working overtime. So I started to watch what people were doing, and what they would do was they would take a whole stack of orders and they'd go start picking the whole stack. So I said to the supervisor, you know, batching's terrible for productivity. He's like, what? I go, batching's terrible for productivity. So they're taking a whole stack, they're spending all morning picking, and then it goes to the pack out table, and the guy at the pack out table is doing nothing all morning, and then afternoon he's pulling his hair out because he's got all these orders he's got to pack. So I go, the concept should be pick one, pack one. And they're like, what? But that's not efficient for the packers. Our goal isn't to make it efficient for the packers. The goal is to ship all the shipments on time throughout the day without overtime. So we put an hour by hour chart in place. So the person bringing the orders was responsible for filling the hour by hour chart out. So what she would do, she would bring the orders out that came in the last hour, and she would write down, here's how many orders I'm bringing out on the chart, how many orders I'm picking up, and then just do the math. Here's how many open orders we have each hour. So what we found was that when we first implemented that, of course, they're batching all their work. And in the first hour, the first half of the day, they shipped like 3 orders, right? And they're typically shipping hundreds per day. So with the hour by hour chart, no, pack one, pick one, or pick one, pack one, right? So now when she brings in the first hour, we know how they're performing against that pick one, pack one behavior that we're looking for. So now we can go out and the manager can look, oh, first hour we packed 10. Okay, great. Second hour we packed 12. Okay, great. Our balance is 30 orders. Oh, third hour we got a bunch of orders. Now we're at 45. Now I can immediately make the decision, do I need to bring somebody over to help, or can they get it corrected on their own? So it's that immediate feedback so that we can take action before the end of the shift, right, and get things back to normal condition. So we sort of define like what normal looks like, so about 30 orders is where they need to be, okay? You can put a tolerance on that and say, okay, if we're above 45, bring help. If we're below 15, maybe we move somebody out of that department to another department. Okay, so there's an example of where we used it to build accountability into the process. That was sort of a long story, but.
Okay, I have another question. Have you run into individuals that still fear the process changes and don't necessarily cooperate with the new processes being put in? And are there any secrets to bringing these people on board?
Yeah, so lots of those. So what I find is the people that are resisting, they don't understand the whole process. So I'll give you another example. So I had this one supervisor that wasn't the color system I showed on the board. He wasn't following the color system, right? And I knew that because if I go back to the board and I have green cards in this department, right? If green cards get moved before yellow cards, right? So if I look at this department right here, I have incoming in yellow. Okay, if I saw incoming in the green, you're not working to the right priority, right? So I can easily see it. So I kept seeing him violating the color system. So again, I use that as a coaching moment. I said, so why are you working on these orders, not the yellow orders? He said, well, you don't understand. These green orders have 20 hours of work in my department. If I don't get working on them, I'm not going to get finished. This yellow order has 5 hours of work. So I said, yes, I agree, but do you understand this yellow order has 50 hours of work in another department? This one that you have, this green that has 20 hours, has 2 hours in the next department. So it's not how much work your department has, it's how much work it is to complete the job. And like a light bulb came on, like, oh, now I understand. So he was just under the wrong assumption, right? Because for 40 years, he was like, I work on the jobs that have the most work content in my department first, right? That was the motive behavior for 40 years. It's difficult to break that. But he didn't understand that the lead time is based on the total work to be done, not just in his department. So again, most times I see when people violate it, they have a misunderstanding of what we're trying to accomplish by implementing this new process or this new system. You need to make sure that people have a good understanding of the reason why we're doing it. If they don't understand why, they're going to resist doing it. So it goes back to that change matrix we talked about in previous sessions with the alligators, the pot of gold, the crutches, and the mermaids, right? So they don't understand, they don't have a complete understanding of why we're making the change.
Max, can I add something?
Yep.
So we also have a process that's called design sprint, and basically the resistance is going much lower when we have an upfront buy-in of the various participants in that company. And again, this process is to bring the alignment and the agreement on the actions and directions and the changes in the system that are going to be placed, and the concepts that they are changing, and then along the changes themselves, the resistance it's greatly lower, and the accountability is built part of the plan of the change that they are suggested. So that's one thing that I wanted wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is that the visual management is like sometimes is physical, like you showed, but sometimes it's also represented in electronic ways and in such softwares that show, for example, the same priority system of colors. It's been presented and available digitally, and basically also available outside of the local physical for management to be accessed and so forth. Even, and it's just take the place right there, and it makes it available anytime, anywhere,
Real time.
anywhere. So this is kind of the, but of course it's a kind of an extension, or it's the same exactly visual management that we want to achieve in just a different way. It depends on the company needs, the company size, and so forth. And again, it's what is implemented where. That's kind of the comments I wanted to say.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, so I'm finished. So thanks everyone for attending today.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We will see you next week on Wednesday at noon.
Thank you, Max, for another great presentation. Thank you.